Stewarding America Sunday, what's it all about? I know I do not make it a practice of bringing politics to the pulpit. If you've been here for any length of time, you know that I'm not on a soapbox very regularly. However, the Bible says, preach the whole counsel of God, says to be instant, in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. And the whole counsel of God affects our whole life. And part of our lives is lived in America with government, with policies, with politicians, and so forth. And we need to ask ourselves, what biblical role do we have in our nation at a time like this? There is an election coming up just a few weeks away. We're about to, as a church, switch gears into a missions focus. But I wanted to take this Sunday and sound the bell, as it were, to make sure that we are thinking about our stewardship. We have been entrusted by God with this nation. What is our biblical responsibility? Now, I know that politics are not popular, and many Christians believe that we shouldn't talk about politics at all, and we shouldn't get involved for one reason or another. Some are afraid churches will lose their tax-exempt status. I've got a sheet here, by the way, of pastoral do's and don'ts, a guide of what churches can do and churches can't do. The list of things that churches can do is very long compared to the list of things that churches cannot do. I think many churches are paralyzed by a fear of stepping out of bounds and losing their tax-exempt status. God did not ever say, go into all the world and preach the gospel, but don't lose your tax-exempt status. Now, I'm not trying to lose it, but I am saying I know that we have a legal responsibility and right, I should say, to, as a church, even make ourselves aware and to talk about these things. And where does politics end and our spiritual lives begin? There's a lot of overlap here, folks, and it's important for us as a church to make sure that we are not putting our heads in the sand at a time that churches are called upon to wake up and do what God would have us do in these days. Churches, some would say, should just focus on the gospel, because if we just got the gospel out and everybody got saved, they would vote right. Well, a couple things wrong with that. Number one, folks get saved and still don't vote right. Okay, there needs to be some teaching on this to see, what does the Bible say? What is voting right? Voting right is voting Bible. All right, that's voting right. Not a red or a blue. It is Bible. But also, while we're getting the gospel out, what do we do in the meantime? We need to do our duty as Christian citizens. Some would say there's no good candidates to vote for, so let's just forget about it. I won't accept the lesser of two evils. If there's a good fundamental Baptist brother, I'd vote for him. No, you wouldn't. We don't like half the Baptist brothers around us half the time, so I wouldn't bank on that, right? But until Jesus Christ himself is on a ballot, we will be voting between the lesser of two evils. All right? So does that mean we just throw it out? Well, some would say, yeah, we do. We just throw it out. In fact, I have a pastor friend who would say that. Politics is hopeless. We're a sinful nation. It's over for us. Let the judgment come. And we go around and around on that. I don't believe that's biblical, to just say, let the judgment come, when God is a God of mercy, grace, and love, and he has extended his mercy to this nation over and over and over and over again, far longer than you and I would if we were God. And this is not just about you and me, it's about souls. And so I believe we as Christians should take a serious look at this. And we have been in the book of Nehemiah, and Nehemiah chapter 2 has been our theme, strengthened for the work. 2:18, he tells them of the hand of his God, which is good upon him. And then he says, then it says, they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. And we can learn a lot from Nehemiah that can help us with this question today concerning the pulpit and politics, Christians and their patriotic responsibility. Where do we fit? What are we supposed to do? I believe Nehemiah can help us. So I want to just ask us this question. What if Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther had been given an opportunity to vote? Now, why these three? Well, we started this year in Ezra. We've worked our way to Nehemiah. And in the middle of the book of Ezra is the story of Esther. That's the time frame. We preached through the book of Esther about 4 years ago on Wednesday night. If you missed that, it should be all recorded on the website. But these three can help us. All three of these individuals lived in a time of captivity and bondage. They did not know what freedom was. And yet, when God gave them favor and opened up some windows of opportunity, they took those opportunities. And I believe we can be helped. So let's first of all consider Ezra with me. Consider Ezra. Go to the book of Ezra, chapter 1, verse 1. Ezra 1, verse 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites with all them whose spirit God had raised to go up to build the house of the Lord which is in Jerusalem. Cyrus makes a decree, and he sends them out, but doesn't just send them out, he sends them out with money and resources and everything they need to build this house. Now, if you are a Jew living in captivity in this day, this is a miracle. This is the answer to your prayers. This is answers to prayers you haven't even prayed. I mean, you didn't even think it could be this good. And now it's happening, and what in the world? And as far as Jews and freedom, that's unheard of in this day and age. As far as the opportunity to vote for their future, there was no opportunity. This is given to them. What are they going to do? Should they jump at it? Should they work together with Cyrus? Well, Cyrus was not a God-fearing man. Now here in this passage, it almost seems like he is. The Spirit of the Lord talks to him, and he says, according to the God of heaven, you need to go and do this, and he is the God, and so forth. And so some speculate that maybe he came to the Lord and became a God-fearer. I don't know for sure. History also tells us that this was not the first time or the only time he did this. There were a lot of captured peoples that he had with a lot of different religions, and when you're managing a humongous dynasty full of nations that you don't have the internet and communication like we do, how do you keep all these people pacified? How do you keep all these captive people under you? Well, let's send them back to build their temples. Let's keep them happy. And by the way, pray for me. Pray for me. So there could have been some self-serving motives in this. But regardless of whether or not he's a good guy doing a good thing or a bad guy doing a good thing for the wrong reason, the Jews went with it. They worked together with Cyrus, an immoral pagan man who was willing to extend an opportunity to them. Can Christians do that? Are Christians allowed to work with a corrupt politician and take the blessing that he gives them? Well, Ezra thought so, and so did the Jews around him. And the Bible says that God stirred them up to work with him. There's a verse there that we read that says there in verse 5, first of all, verse 1 says God stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, and then verse 5 says that the Spirit of God stirred up the Levites. God was involved in all of this. So here's the question I want to ask you. If Cyrus was running for president during this day, and he's running on the platform that, though I'm a pagan man, and so forth and so on, and you might not like my policies and agendas, but if you had this caveat in his platform that I'm going to let you guys rebuild your temple, do you think Ezra would have voted for him? I would submit to you that I think he would have. Well, what about his personality? What about his morals? Is he really a Christian? Well, as I mentioned before, Jesus isn't on the ballot, folks. And until he's on the ballot, we're going to be choosing between the lesser of two evils. I've had Christians who have said, I can't do that. My conscience will not allow me to vote for someone that is corrupt or profane or whatever. And I would say to that person, I would prayerfully, graciously say, let's educate that conscience. The Bible can help us with this. And if you have a tight conscience and you have a conscience that's not seared, you have a sensitive conscience, that's a good thing. I wouldn't want to hurt your conscience, but I believe we can educate it. You look at this, and I tell you, there are people who tell me, I've had pastor friends tell me, churches should just go ahead and pay taxes. Don't take the tax break that the government gives churches. The reason we have a tax break from our government is because of biblical principle. The Levites and the Levitical cities got, if you will, tax breaks. They got provision, special treatment. Some of this is biblical tie-over because of our country's biblical heritage. But would Ezra have rejected this? No, he didn't. He took help. He took money. He took provisions. And he said, thank you, sir. I'm headed on to rebuild the temple. Ezra and his companions, I want you to see, first of all, worked with both Cyrus and Darius. And neither one of these men give much indication of being God-fearing individuals. But they gave favor to God's people to follow their faith. And God's people said, we'll take it. Thank you very much. Now we go on, we look at Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1 says, and it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. The reason for that is Nehemiah was a servant, and he was the king's cupbearer. So here he is, a slave, but he's in the king's presence. Now, I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. Why was he afraid? Because he was working for a tyrant. You couldn't be sad in the king's presence. He wanted music and frivolity and the court jester, or whatever he had back then, not a court jester, but entertainment and make me feel good. And here is one of his servants who is sad in his presence, and he gets called out on it, and he's scared. So he says, let the king live forever. But why? Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? Well, that's music to your ears. So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me to Judah unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. Now, Nehemiah was working with Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes was the king who had originally halted the building progress with both Ezra and Nehemiah. There's some overlap there, but he had halted the building progress, allowing the work of God to crumble into the state of disarray that they found it. This is not a friend. You would not see him as an ally. Artaxerxes was not favorable to the Jews, nor did he seem favorable to the God of the Jews in general. But I want you to see something. He was favorable to Nehemiah for whatever reason. We don't really know. Here's this slave who I have, who serves me my cup. And he must have done it really good. Maybe he didn't slosh it, whatever, I don't know. He was just a faithful servant. He's always there, pours that wine, serves that to the king, and he had a soft spot in his heart for Nehemiah. There was the favor of God. It was the favor of God that was on Nehemiah. And because of Nehemiah, his heart was turned toward the people that he had previously opposed. Now, you have a couple other people that are in power in Nehemiah's time. It was not just the king, Artaxerxes, but it was also the governors, Sanballat and Tobiah. Look at verse 9 and 10. Then I came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. So who is Sanballat and Tobiah the servant? By the way, the servant would not mean a slave. It would mean like he was like the chief of staff, or he was a right-hand man to Sanballat. These guys worked together in the politics of the day. Verse 9 says he came to the governors. And the governors, at least a couple of them, are Sanballat and Tobiah. They also mention a guy named Geshem the Arabian later on. These are also the politicians that he has to work with. These are the locals. He comes from Artaxerxes, a Babylon area, to the locals, and the local government's having none of it. Well, what are you going to do, Nehemiah? Well, Sanballat was a Moabite, which was they were the lifelong enemies of the Jews. But Sanballat was also the leader of the Samaritans. They would have been on site. In many respects, as far as culture, even as far as looks and ethnicities, Nehemiah would have had more in common with Sanballat and these Samaritans than he would have the Babylonians that he was coming from. It'd be easier to just fall in with these folks. They're the locals, and I kind of understand where they're coming from. But that's not what he did. Who did he stick with? He stuck with the guy who gave him freedom to do the will of God. Sanballat says, I don't want you to build this city. We can be great friends as long as you don't build this city. You can have a great life, but you can't build the city. Sorry, God told me to build the city. I've got to worship God according to the law. I've got my family to worry about. I've got our future to worry about. We're going to serve God God's way. Now, there's a pagan man who will let me do it. You should understand what I'm trying to do and be for it. But if you're not for it, well, I can't work with you. I'm working with this guy. Sanballat was determined to stop the work. He was determined to instill fear in the people, and he was determined to kill people if necessary. That's in the text, chapter 6. He wanted to kill them. Chapter 5, I should say. Artaxerxes was willing to allow the Jews to rebuild the city, even going so far as facilitating it with letters of commendation and provision. So here's what I want you to think. Allow me some creative license here. It's a presidential campaign back in Nehemiah's day, and it's Artaxerxes versus Sanballat. That's the ticket. What does he do? Sanballat is running on the platform of, I will eliminate the Jews and tear down all the walls of Jerusalem. And then you've got Artaxerxes for president. You know, hey, it's an election year. I want everybody to love me as much as I love me. And so if these guys want to build something, go ahead, build it. Yeah, build it. Everybody build. What do you want? Yeah, hey, just vote for me. Vote for me. So I don't know what his motives were. I don't know any of that. But neither one are good guys. Who do you think Nehemiah would vote for if given the chance? Well, you can see who he worked with when given the chance. Nehemiah was a model citizen in that he worked with the government that he was given. He used his voice, his position, and his opportunity to make a difference. Not everybody was the king's cupbearer. You recognize that? And you know what? If you're not responsible for an opportunity that you don't have. Somebody might be watching this live streamed in some other country that is closed to the gospel with no freedoms. And they would love to go to the polls and vote according to the Word of God. They're not going to stand before God and answer for an opportunity that never presented itself. But you and I will. Nehemiah would. He was the king's cupbearer. That put him in close proximity to the king, a place of influence. He had to do something with it, and he did. He stayed true to his word as well. He returned at the times appointed to give reports. In other words, he didn't just throw off the guy as soon as he got what he wanted. You read the book of Nehemiah, and you see he goes back to report, and he comes and he goes back to report. He worked together with this pagan official. He set an example of action rather than passivity for us to follow. And here's the key one. He supported the leadership that permitted his faith while rejecting the leadership that persecuted his faith. And he did not say, I'm going to wait until I find a leader who personifies my faith. And once that happens, then I'm in. Because, you know, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise. That is a verse, right? But don't quote it the wrong time. He was not becoming best friends with Artaxerxes. He was simply taking what he was allowed and using it for good. Let's consider Esther together. I love the story of Esther. It is my favorite book in the Bible. It is my favorite story. It's just phenomenal. We preached through this, I think, 4 years ago. Like I said, it's online if you want to look through it. The story of Esther, you have Mordecai the Jew, his daughter, not actual daughter, but basically his daughter, Esther. She becomes the queen when King Ahasuerus goes out and takes every pretty girl in the whole land and works through them, you might say, until he finds the one that he wants to be his queen. Mordecai is also involved in the government. Haman is the right-hand man to the king, and Haman is a wicked man. And Mordecai does not bow down to Haman, and Haman notes it and says, I'm going to kill him, but not just that, I'm going to kill all of his family, his friends, and he finds out he's a Jew, okay, I'll just kill all the Jews. So you have Ahasuerus, that's the king. You have Haman, that's the right-hand man. You have Mordecai, the Jew. You have Esther, the queen. And Haman has now decided to kill all of the Jews, so he is a devious man. He's cunning. He goes to King Ahasuerus and gets him to sign this law, written the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be altered. On a certain day, they would exterminate the Jews. Now this sounds familiar if you've read history. This kind of thing seems to pop up every now and then. Well, Haman was doing it before it was cool. He was, I'm going to go after the Jews, and I'm going to wipe them out in one day. Yeah, by the way, it should be no surprise that God's people would be targeted throughout history. So they get wind of this, and Mordecai is the Jew. He is just distraught. He is sackcloth and ashes by the gate, weeping. And the Queen Esther, hears of this and sends Hatach to see what's wrong with Mordecai. And here we pick it up in Esther 4 and verse 6. So Hatach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. He said, you kill all of them, and I'll give you money. Also, he gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication. So he actually gives the executive order, if you will, to Esther so she can read it herself and see what's going down. And then he says, I want you to go in and make a request before him for her people. See what he said? We're all going to die. You're the queen. You need to go in and beg for our lives. So she, in verse 10, gave commandment unto Mordecai. Verse 11, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he might live. I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. So you know what her answer was? Thank you, but no thank you. I recognize that we're all going to die, but you know what? I'm doing okay here. I finally made queen. I'm taken care of, and hopefully this will work out, but I'm not going in there because it's going to break the law. And unless he sticks the golden scepter out, off with my head. Well, Mordecai gets that, and he says, I got an answer for you. They told Mordecai Esther's words. Verse 12, verse 13 says, Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. God will always have a remnant. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Wow. Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and I will go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And so will I go into the king, which was not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him, meaning he went, got the people, they fasted and prayed. And she fasted and prayed, and she went in. You know, I love this back and forth, this dialogue, because it helps us here. It's the same argument that we have. Boy, this country's going down the tubes. Oh, we got problems. Oh, they're taking God out of the schools, and they're messing up families, and they don't even know what is marriage anymore, and the country's killing babies. There's murdering 3,000 babies a day or something like that, and all this stuff that we're doing, and it's going down. Well, you know what? Someone says, maybe you ought to do something about it. Oh, I can't. I can't for this reason. And the answer comes back, yes, you can. And if you don't, you won't be a part of the deliverance. And according to Mordecai here, he said to her, you'll be destroyed. You're going to miss out on not just the deliverance, you're going to miss out on everything. Now, who were the people in charge? You had Ahasuerus, who's Xerxes. So there's Artaxerxes and Xerxes. Ahasuerus is Xerxes. We'll just call him Ahasuerus. He was a wicked, godless madman, according to history. And in fact, you look in the book of Esther, he makes several decisions throughout the whole book. Not one of them does he make without someone else's help. Literally, every word that he speaks in the book of Esther, someone's whispering in his ear. The guy didn't have anything. He just didn't have it. He was a madman. He was known for his unreasonable rage. He one time ordered that the waves of the sea be whipped with the whips for execution, for judgment, because the waves had knocked over a bridge that he was building. So he orders these soldiers, go out and whip the waves. Can you imagine those guys? Yes, sir. Naughty. Don't knock over the madman's waves. Okay. I think he learned, boss. I think he learned. He was out of his mind, and he didn't do too well with wars. Look at that, too. He didn't do too well. He was not exactly a military genius. He was also known for his lust for women. He went through the entire known kingdom, taking all the pretty girls, and they would spend one night with him, and then they would go into the harem's house, and they would never be seen of again unless he called for them. Basically, they were condemned to a prison, a concubine prison of sorts. He wasn't a very good guy. His morals weren't good, but I will tell you this, he did have a soft spot in his heart for the Jews. He loved Esther. She was his queen. And he was willing to spare them and let them have their freedom. What about Haman? Haman, on the other hand, was a narcissistic would-be murderer. He too was an immoral man, selfish, conceited, willing to do anything to get to the top. He was subtle and cunning, and he had the king wrapped around his finger for a while. He was determined to destroy all of the Jews in one day. Now, when this plot comes before Mordecai and he fasts and prays, and Esther fasts and prays, and she goes in before Ahasuerus, he extends that scepter. She doesn't lose her head. She comes forward. Maybe he really loved her a lot. There she is. There's my queen. Where's my scepter? Come on down, lady. I don't know what all got her down the aisle, but he didn't kill her. She comes down and, what do you want? And she, long story short, she pleads for her people. And she exposes the plot of Haman. And of course, he goes into that rage again. What? Haman's trying to kill my queen? And Mordecai was a man who, if you read the book of Esther, saved the king's life. So this guy is trying to take out Mordecai, who saved the king's life, and take out the Jews and his queen. And so he is very upset, and he ends up killing Haman, hangs him on the gallows that were intended for Mordecai. So you have Ahasuerus, who is favorable to the Jews. You have Haman, who is not. For whom, let me ask, would Esther have voted if she had been given the chance? You have it. Here it is. A madman versus a murderer. Well, that's great. You know what? Let's just stay home and play Scrabble. Let's just stay home. This is ridiculous. Obviously Christians don't need to be involved in this election. They're both immoral. You have foul mouths. One guy's out of his head. One guy's killing everybody. They're probably trying to kill each other. Who knows what's going on with this thing? Let's just stay home, the Jews say. No, the Jews didn't say that. No, the Jews didn't say that at all. The Jews said, there's a guy here who's willing to give us our freedom. And he wrote, and he said on the day that was supposed to be their execution day, he said they can arm themselves, they can assemble, and they can defend themselves. And you know what they did? They armed themselves, they defended themselves, and they won. And they won so handily that other people converted to Judaism out of fear of the Jews. Now, I don't know that we want to preach the gospel quite that way. That's not the application here at all. Don't run with that. But it was interesting to see that the people recognized God's with these people. I think I'm on this side now. Yep, I'm on this side. Now, who would you vote for if it looks so hopeless? Well, here, the Jews weren't looking, catch this, the Jews weren't looking at a madman and a murderer. They were looking at the opportunity to die or the opportunity to defend. And that was where they cast their vote. It was as simple as that. You know, I think Esther helps us here as she, like Nehemiah, she recognized her unique opportunity and therefore saw her obligation to take action for her people. Mordecai put it to her. He said, "You are here for such a time as this. If you blow it, God's going to have to find somebody else, and He will, but it's not going to help you out. You're going to miss out on the opportunity, and you and your family will perish," he said. You know, she set the example by taking the opportunity that she was afforded, and she set the example by starting with fasting and praying. She put feet to those prayers, though. She did not just fast and pray. She put feet to those prayers. And she was willing to approach the king at the risk of her own life. You know, when we go to a ballot box, a ballot booth, a voting booth, we don't go at the risk of our life. You get up on a Tuesday morning, have a coffee, you know, a nice warm shower, whatever you do, put your shoes on, walk down to the voting booth. I mean, they're on every corner. You don't even have to go 5 miles. You go in there, stand in line, chat with the people. Hey, how you doing? Cast your vote, go home. It is as easy as falling off a log, and yet I'm amazed when I see the numbers of how many million Christians say they won't vote. How many million Christians did not vote last time? I've seen numbers that estimate between 20 and 50 million. It seems crazy. I don't even know if I can believe those numbers. So I'm not going to say that is what it is. But I've seen these numbers flashing around. I don't know how many millions it is, but I'll tell you this: if Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah were here, I think they would say, "You have an opportunity. Therefore, you have an obligation." She recognized that if she did nothing, all would be lost. What can we learn about our relationship with politics and political leaders from Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther? 5 things. 1, they worked with and submitted to the leadership that they were given. I know things look bleak in politics. I hate to turn on the news. I hate to watch what's going on. It is confusing. It is depressing. If you want to ruin a good day of going out and seeing fall colors, sit down on a park bench and open your phone and look at a news article. It's sad. But as bad as it gets for us, just remember this: you have a choice. You might say, but it's just madmen. It's one madman against the other madmen. People, everyone's immoral, everyone's rude, everyone's crazy. I get it. But you have a choice and others have not. And it's not about the men. It is about the opportunities that may be afforded in regards to the platforms. They were willing to work with and submit to the leadership they were given. They were willing to appeal to that leadership on behalf of their people, their principles, and their future. Some people say, don't worry about writing letters to the politicians. Don't worry about voting. It doesn't do any good. I don't think Mordecai would have agreed with you. He told her, you get to that politician and you tell him. And if you don't, someone else is going to have to. Thirdly, they were willing to accept any help that was extended to them. This was financial aid. Financial aid. We shouldn't take anything from the government. If the government wants to be a blessing to churches, let the government be a blessing to churches. Letters of commendation. They got letters of permission. They got provisions of all kinds, and they used those things to the glory of God. They freely enjoyed and fought for the freedoms, rights, and privileges that they were given. And we ought follow that example. They finally involved themselves in politics, if you will, to the degree that A, was necessary, and to the degree that they were able to in their day. People will say, but if God wanted us to vote, he'd have a verse about voting in the Bible. Folks, there's no verse about voting in the Bible because the original recipients of the Bible didn't have a right to vote. So God would have never pinned go vote because we're the only group of Christians alive who's ever known what that is. So there wasn't going to be a verse, go vote. But there are principles that say go vote. And we'll see a couple of those in a minute. So what is our response? First of all, number one response should be fast and pray. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, every one of them started there. And Daniel, I didn't get him in there, but Daniel, he started all this before these guys. Fast and pray, fast and pray. That's where we should start. Secondly, take action. They did not just fast and pray. They then put feet to those prayers. God will lead you in regards to the actions you can take to make a difference. It may be using social media. Do so respectfully, graciously, and with a Christ-like spirit. But spread the truth, spread the word. Make sure you spread things that are true. Don't just spread stuff because it came from Uncle Bob. Make sure you're looking into this stuff, and we're doing this responsibly. But get the word out about how to vote biblical values, about what the issues are. Talk to people face to face. Have respectful, decent conversations. That's something we've lost today. The ability to have face-to-face, Christ-honoring, different, opposing view conversations as we challenge each other's thinking based on the Word of God. Volunteer for organizations that align with biblical principles, but there are things that you can do. Take action. Thirdly, vote. 3 things about voting. Voting is your patriotic duty, first and foremost. This is the most basic responsibility of any citizen of the United States of America. And you got to recognize it was paid for with gallons of blood. Every war, every veteran, everyone that fell did so that we would have freedom. And when you say, I'm not going to vote, everybody's just jerks in Hollywood, I'm just going to go play golf, you are stepping over the dead bodies of all of the ones who purchased this for you. It is your patriotic duty. Secondly, it's your Christian duty. We're faithful stewards. 1 Corinthians 4:2, it's required of stewards that a man be found faithful. How could we look God in the eye one day and say that we were faithful when he gave us so much and we said, but there was no independent Baptist, so I couldn't vote? Like I said before, I don't know if I'd vote for every independent Baptist. But we need to vote for biblical principle. 1 Timothy 2:1 says, I exhort therefore that first of all supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. For kings, for all that are in authority, that we may lead quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Do you see that? Those words came from God. He wants us to live quiet, peaceable lives. That's God's idea. That's good stuff. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who will have all men be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. His plan was for freedom, for quiet, peaceable lives, for churches and families to be able to live together with the opportunity to give the gospel freely, because he wants all men to be saved. Some of the talk I'm hearing is foolish talk. A pastor, a friend of mine, says, I think we would get the gospel out better if we lost our freedom and had to do like China in an underground church. Because the gospel always says spread the fastest in persecution. That is the talk of fools. You don't take freedom that God gave, that God says in His Word is for the good of seeing people saved, and just throw it away? No, we're not embracing persecution. It probably is coming. We won't embrace it. We'll take it if it comes, but we need to trust God for this biblical ideal. It is your Christian duty, but it is thirdly your familial duty. What about your family? Let brotherly love continue, Hebrews 13:1. There's a lot of ways to let brotherly love continue, and one way you can show love to your brother is to do your duty in regards to voting Bible principle. Don't say you love your brother and then do nothing when your nation needs you. Don't say you love your kids and your grandkids and do nothing about their future. I don't know what's going to happen, but if one day I live to be 85 years old and I'm hunkered down in a bunker, we're doing an underground church thing with candles, and my great-grandkid says, so Grandpa, tell us about how it used to be. You used to preach in public? Online? And you weren't arrested? You got to vote? Yeah, that's how it was. So did you vote? Well, no. Did you do anything with your freedom of speech? No. I didn't want to get too political, what might make someone upset. And I didn't want to lose my tax exempt status. We lost it anyway. But I'm praying for you kids, and it'll be okay. Keep your chin up. That's one conversation I don't plan to ever have with my grandkids. Hezekiah was one who was willing to do that. Hezekiah sinned a grievous sin, and the prophet came to him and said, judgment is coming because of your sin. However, because of the mercy of God, the judgment is not going to come in your day. It's going to come in your kids' and your grandkids' day. Now, if that happened to you, you would have said, no, not my kids, my grandkids. No, Lord, let it come in my day. Let it come in my day. But that is not what Hezekiah said. What Hezekiah said was this: good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken, for there shall be peace and truth in my day. And I tell you, if you don't vote, if you don't speak, if you don't do anything to stand for the biblical values that you say you believe in, you're Hezekiah. Judgment's coming. Boy, this world's going down the tubes. But at least it's not happening in my day. Good is the word that you have spoken unto me. There will be peace and truth in my day. That is the height of selfishness and irresponsibility. God has called you and I for such a time as this. Lord, I pray that you would help us as individuals and families and churches across this land to stand, to take the action that you would have us to take. Lord, you have afforded us the opportunity to vote, unheard of in the scope of human history, for Christians to have this kind of an impact and influence. Unheard of in history. We're living in a little bubble of freedom that could pop at any moment, but it's your grace and mercy, that is only by your grace and mercy that it has continued. And Lord, so many Christians have just given up in despair and allowed the distractions and the disillusionment of all the garbage to just cause them to throw in the towel. Lord, help us to stand again, to wake up, and to do right as a country. Lord, I pray that you'd help each one here just to make the commitment to follow you.